Hi guys, today we will be tackling about the four audit processes. First process is to set the desired level of audit risk. The second one is to assess inherent risk, which are both tackled in chapter 5. The next process is to assess the control risk, which is tackled in chapter 6. And the last audit process is to determine the acceptable level of detection risk, which is tackled in chapter 8. So today we will be only focusing on the chapter 6, which is entitled Consideration of Internal Control. So, assessing control risk, sa kanina part is dire mo determine ang auditors to evaluate or assess ang entity, ang ilang internal control system kung effective ba ang pag-implement or pag-manage ani sa management.
So the first topic of chapter 6 is nature of internal control. So if ang company gani is gamay pa or mapay pagsugod, so usually ang owner sila ang manager, ang cashier, ang bookkeeper, etc. So the owner can oversee all of the functions of the company. However, as the entities nagkadako na, it becomes necessary na mag-delegate or mag-assign of functional responsibilities to employees. So once this occurs, mechanisms need to be introduced which enable the performance of the employees to be checked to ensure that they are fulfilling their responsibilities as intended. So mauna ni atong need upon internal procedures because as we delegate ang functions to several persons junasan because nindako naman sa operations sa company. So need na nato mag-assign of different people and ang kaning mga tauhan na is ato sa tan-awon or i-check ang ilang gipangbuhat. So how can we check or assure that they are functioning as intended? So we have to establish or design internal control procedures within our company. So according to PSA 315, it defined internal control as a process designed and effected by those charged with governance, management, and other personnel to provide reasonable assurance about the achievement of the entity's objectives with regards to reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness, and efficiency of operations, compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So ang purpose niya sa internal control is to achieve the objectives sa company. So the definition embodies four essential concepts. So first is an internal control is a process. So internal control is a process. So therefore it involves a systematic mga steps and chronologically ordered steps siya. So meaning dapat wagi sa step 1 before ka mag-proceed sa step 2, 3, and subsequent steps. Second, internal control is effected by those charged with governance, management, and other personnel. So the other personnel na diminan is ang mga supervisory levels. So ang supervisory levels is at different levels of management within an organization like senior manager, mga executive or top level manager. So ang those charged with governance would usually involve ang mga board of directors, board of trustees, mga higher level of management. So not all ng mga companies separate ang those charged with governance and ang management. Naiuban nga usara sila pero sa kanisa context sa book ni Salosagcol is separate silang duha assuming that they are different persons. So internal control is accomplished by people at every level of organization including the management, those charged with governance, and the personnel of the company. So ang responsibilidad sa management is mag-establish a control environment and maintain the policies and procedures to assist in achieving the entity's objectives. And ang those charged po is ang trabaho niya is to ensure the integrity of internal control that is being set by the management para na ay taga-check sa trabaho sa usap-usap. And the staff personnel po is they should also perform their respective functions in order to accomplish the objectives of the entity.
So this is the continuation of Jekell's report regarding the nature of internal control. Number 3 is internal control can be expected to provide reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, of achieving the entity's objectives. This is because there are inherent limitations that may affect the internal control's effectiveness. Number 1 is management's usual requirement that the cost of an internal control should not exceed the expected benefits to be derived. It means that kinahanglan nga sigurohon sa pagdumala na kini ng mga gasto dili mulapas sa mga benepisyo. That striking a crucial balance to prevent unnecessary financial burdens on the organization. Second is most internal controls tend to be directed at routine transactions rather than non-routine transactions, creating a limitation where certain activities may lack adequate coverage from standard control measures. Third is human error risk. Despite controls in place, the potential for human error remains due to carelessness, distractions, errors in judgments, and misunderstandings of instructions. Fourth is the possibility of circumvention of internal controls through the collusion among employees. Fifth is management override risk. By maintaining checks and balances, including independent oversight, is essential to prevent managerial override and ensure the integrity of internal controls. Sixth is the procedure inadequacy and compliance deterioration. It means na ang mga pagbago sa mga kondisyon, teknolohiya, regulation o istruktura sa organization mahimong maghimo sa kasabtangan ng mga pamaagi sa pagkontrol nga dili igo. Number four is internal control is designed to help achieve the entity's objectives in the following categories. Una is operational objectives, that effectiveness and efficiency of operations. Second is compliance objective. It means that compliance with relevant laws and regulations. And lastly, financial report objective it means that reliability of financial reporting. So when auditors assess an entity's financial statements, their primary focus is on ensuring the accuracy and dependability of financial information presented. Tungod niini ang katuyuan sa pag-report sa financial, ang mga kalabutan sa pagkakasaligan sa pag-report sa financial, nahimong sentro nga kahingawa sa mga auditor. They specifically examine policies and procedures within the accounting and internal control systems that directly impact the assertions made in the financial statements, ensuring that these assertions are accurate and reliable. Operation and compliance objectives may be relevant to audit only if they are related to data the auditor evaluates to determine the reliability of some financial statement assertions. For instance, in auditing inventory, operational efficiency is considered if it directly affects the accuracy of financial assertions, such as inventory valuation. Operational objectives matter in the audit when they directly influence the reliability of financial statements assertions.
Components of internal control. So, internal control includes a number of components that work together to ensure the accuracy of financial reporting. So, naay yung mga components of internal control. First is the control environment. It refers sa overall attitude, awareness, ug action of management towards sa internal controls. Second is the risk assessment. This is the process of identifying ug pag-evaluate sa risk na makakompromise sa accomplishment of goals. Third is information and communication. The system that support the identification, capture, and exchange of information in a timely and relevant manner. Fourth is the control activities. It is the rules o guidelines na support sa implementation of management directives. Last is monitoring. Ongoing assessments of the effectiveness of internal controls over time. So these components work together to form a system that aids in asset protection, financial data accuracy, and operational efficiency.
Control environment is a set of procedures, guidelines, and organizational framework that serve as foundation for implementing strong and effective internal control throughout the whole company. In other words, sa control environment nato mahibaw-an kung strong or weak ba ang internal control sa usa ka company. For example, strong ang internal control kung ang management and those charged with governance are hands-on in improving strong and effective internal control system to prevent errors, material misstatements, employee or management fraud. On the other hand, makaingon ta nga weak ang internal control kung ang management and those charged with governance kay nagpasagad lamang or wala take of action bisan na mga loopholes, na mga material misstatement, errors, and etc. nga nahitabo. There are factors reflected in the control environment. It includes integrity and ethical values. Weak ang internal control kung ang management or those charged with governance itself wala integrity and ethical values. Example, there should be a policy implemented in the company by the management or those charged with governance, like na ay consequence madawat or tanggalon ba sa trabaho ang employee na involved sa fraud, dishonest, unethical or any illegal acts that could materially affect the financial statements. In this case, dili jud mubuhat or maglikay jud og buhat o any illegal acts ang mga employees aron dili sila matangtang sa ilang trabaho. Management philosophy and operating style example, ang management na ay attitude nga aggressive at no matter what, dapat ma-achieve nila na ang mga profit goals and objectives. So what will they do kung di nila tumaabot? There will be a probable indication that there will be fraud happening next. Ilang dayaon na ilang financial statement o ilang internal control in order to achieve their goals and objectives like what the Enron Corporation did. Active participation to those charged with governance. Kung actively participating si management or those charged with governance sa pag-improve sa ilang internal control system, then the internal control is strong. Commitment to competence. Ibutang ni management sa utok or sa mindset sa iyang mga personnel or iyang mga employee na they are competent company and they have goals and objectives to achieve. However, kung dili jud ma-achieve, then so be it. Kung unsa di results sa company ana nga year, maura pod ang ilang i-record dili kay ilang dayaon ang ilang financial statement or ang ilang internal control. Personal policies and procedures. Diba kung mag-apply tag trabaho na ay fit qualification and requirements nga gipangayo ang company para ma-prevent ang errors, fraud, material misstatements, unethical or illegal acts to happen. Dili kay bisan dili qualified, basta kay imong kaila, imong amigo or imong bayaw, imong dawaton. Dapat mo consider pud ta sa atong mga employee dili kay puro ra pud ang atong company atong hunahunahon and vice versa. Like alagaan pud nato atong mga employee, tagaan nato sa atong sweldo, diya ato pud silang providean sa ilang mga needs like CA sila kay na emergency sa ila. And lastly, assignment of responsibility and authority or organizational structure. Ari ni mo mahibaw-an kung asa ka moadto kung kibali na kay gusto i-address ang problem. Prone pod sa material misstatements and errors ang incompatible functions and too much workloads assigned to an employee. Example, siya pa'y cashiers, siya pa'y tigugas, siya pa'y mo grills, nga na. So, na-joy possibility nga na-joy mga mistakes nga mahitabo.
The goals of the entity's business, such as technological developments, changes in customers' demand, and other economic changes, cannot be achieved without risks. Kipinaagi sa mga business risks, mo-adapt man ang management o mga policies and procedures nga makatabang nila sa pag-identify o sa pag-analyze sa mga risks that can affect the entity's business so that they can know what are the appropriate actions that they need to take to manage the risks that can improve the entity's business. And in audit purposes, the relevant to the preparation of reliable financial statements can be obtained by the auditor through adopting policies and procedures na makapa-achieve sa mga audit objectives.
One of the components of internal control is the information and communication systems. They must have an established system like who will record, and after recording, who will process the transaction, where should be passed the documents next, and who will report the transaction. So there should be persons involved in that. And those persons who are involved in those functions, also they are accountable in case there is a material statement. So they are liable and accountable. So an information system encompasses methods and records that First, identify and report valid transactions. So this has to be with regard to assertions for those transactions that must be reported. Second, describe the transactions in sufficient detail and in a timely manner in order to permit proper classification or transactions for financial reporting. So the second one is assertions based on classifications. Third, measure the value of transactions in a manner that permits recording their proper monetary value in the financial statements. So this will be regards to the accuracy evaluation. Fourth, determine the period in which transactions occurred to permit recording of transactions in the proper accounting period. And this is about cut-off, mga deadlines. So these methods that we must work on, an NSJ effect or a connection with assertions event. So lastly, present properly the transactions and related disclosures in the financial statements properly. So proper presentation of financial statements and disclosures to the financial statements. So communication involves providing an understanding of individual roles and responsibilities pertaining to internal control over financial reporting. So open communication channel involve transparent and accessible means for exchanging information. So this help ensures that exceptions are reported and acted on. So it can be made electronically, verbally, or through the actions of management.
Control activities. Control activities are the policies and procedures that help ensure management directives are carried out. So control activities are protocols, policies, procedures, and guidelines exist to help manage and reduce risks that could prevent a company from reaching its goals. May either be manual or integrated into automated computer-based systems. A simple example of these are, any return is not accepted unless we have the manager's approval. I'm sure you notice at some companies, when you make a return, the manager must be there to approve the return because that is the company's policy. This is an example of manual policy. On the other hand, let's make an example of automated policy wherein it is computer-based. The example will be, don't sell this customer once their credit limit reach a certain amount. For example, once you go above your credit limit, the system would automatically refuse to approve your sale for you. Specific control procedures that are relevant to financial statement audit includes performance reviews, information processing, physical controls, segregation of duties. Performance reviews. This will include reviews and analysis of actual performance against budget, forecast, and prior performance. So basically, this includes an evaluation of an employee's accomplishments along with a database assessment of their strengths, weakness, and areas for improvement by the manager. Effective feedback doesn't condemn. It guides the employer toward doing better next time. Information processing consists of a variety of controls used to check the accuracy, completeness, and authorization of transactions. Example, application controls and general IT controls. The term usually refers to computer-based operations. Information processing consists of locating and capturing information using software to manipulate it into a desired form and outputting the data. An internet search engine is an example of an information processing tool, as is any sophisticated information retrieval system. See also data processing. Physical control. This will include controls over the physical security of assets and records to prevent unauthorized use, theft, or damage. Example, limiting access to stockholding area. In short, physical controls are the implementation of security measures in undefined structure used to deter or prevent unauthorized access to sensitive material. Example of physical controls are closed-circuit surveillance camera, motion or thermal alarm systems, segregation of duties. A company can use this control activity to assign people the responsibility of authorizing recording transactions, and maintaining the custody of assets. This means different individuals should be responsible for related activities. When we say related activities, it is when combined, they can provide a fraud opportunity. So it must be 2 or more persons are involved in the transaction.
So now, I will tackle the last part of components of internal control, the monitoring. So what is monitoring? Monitoring is the process of assessing the quality of internal control performance over time. So ang kanisya is all about ensuring the procedures and controls nga i-put in place aron ma-working ni siya effectively and as intended. So ang kaning monitoring nag-involve og regular reviews, checks and oversight sa management or other internal bodies. It's like a moralist jug safety net to catch any potential issues or irregularities. So nga ang kaning address can be promptly. So ang kaning monitoring has 2 types of control. Mo ni ang ongoing monitoring o separate evaluation. So ang ongoing monitoring is an activities are built into the normal recurring activities of an entity and include regular management and supervisory activities such as preparation of monthly bank reconciliation. So ang kaning ongoing monitoring is a continuous systematic process ni siya that ang integrated dapat dili ni siya ang operation sa usa ka organizations. So ang kaning ongoing monitoring nag-involve og regular evaluations and reviews para i-identify ang address sa any potential risk or issues ason nga ma-arise ni siya. So ang kaning is like having a constant health check for organizations to ensure everything is nagdagan nga smoothly. Sunod is the separate evaluations. Monitoring are monitoring activities that are performed on a non-routine basis such as functions performed by internal auditors. So ang kani siya is nag-focus ni siya sa assessment nga gi-conduct to review certain aspects sa usa ka organization's operation or control. Ang kani siya nga evaluations are typically dili ni siya part sa daily routine o carried out periodically or as needed. Si Jekell nag-base ni sa level of risk associated with the other evaluated. So kani si Jekell nag-provide og kanang deep look at specific areas para i-allow ang more detailed nga understanding and assess of the effectiveness of the organization's control. So kaning most likely ni siya nga having a kanang deep dive into a particular area to ensure everything is in order.
Hello everyone. So today I will be tackling about internal control for a small business. In small business, with a very few employees, it is difficult to have proper segregation of duties or maintain a separate internal audit department. Constantly, internal control system in small business tend to be weak compared to the internal control system of large entities. These weaknesses, however, can be compensated if the owner or the manager are actively participates in the operation of the business. So first, what is internal control? Internal controls are the mechanism, rules, and procedures implemented by a company to ensure the integrity of financial and accounting information, promote accountability, and prevent fraud. So, kami business. Gusto dyan na mo i-handle ang internal control. Dili may maka-audit. Dili may makasuwat sa mga accounting information or anything. Ang amurang ibuhat sa among business is like mupalit mi, matrabaho mi sa among business, like everyday na naamin sa among tindahan or kinsa sa among family na makakita sa lihok sa among business. dili kayo first kuwangan ng tao. Second, mo hire pa mi og employee for auditing or unsa pa na dira or bukan sa accounting is mubayad na po mi og sa para ilang sa expense na po na sa katong ko ng eskwela. Like, ang amo lang ng negosyo is first kay vegetables, like fresh vegetables sa Changi. Like, parang mapalit, makuano, ano is suwat na expense, ang sa mga ipang bayaran, ang sa ipang palit, like, ang sa imong mga profit, ang sa imong kisay ng palit, like, nga na. Munang, lisod ka adyo sa mga small businesses mo handle all internal control. That's all.
Consideration of internal control. Auditors are not responsible for establishing and maintaining an organization's accounting and internal control system. That is the responsibility of the management. Pero, auditors must still understand how an entity or the entity's internal control system kay makahatag hindi mo nag-effect for the audit. So, there are 5 steps for considering the internal control systems of an entity. Pinunhan is obtaining understanding of the internal control. So, dapat magkaibaw sa ang auditor sa nature sa usa ka entity itong sudlan for yun sa entity ang pag-weigh sa ilang financial transactions o safeguard sa ilang assets. Kaduha, documenting the understanding of accounting and internal control system. So dire ang auditor ijang i-record or i-document sa auditor ang ijang assessment or understanding to identify the weaknesses like kanang assessing or sa ijang inventory management diha kana. Katulo, assessing the level of control risk. So i-assess na sa auditor diri ang risk ijang kanang ma-evaluate siya sa effectiveness sa internal control system. Ano diri itong evaluate. Kaupat is performing test. So ang auditor diri sa ikaapat nga process o sa ikaapat nga steps is to perform the test like reviewing documents or observing procedures para makavalidate siya sa effectiveness sa internal control. So, ang last step is documenting the assessed level of risk. Dili nga part ang auditor, isa nang i-document ang ijang na identifying or na-assess na risk or ang risk, ang weaknesses o strength. Unja, i-relay niya ang katong assess niya adto sa management. So, moto ang 5 steps into considering the entity's internal control system. Understanding internal control. So, an auditor should have a sufficient understanding about an entity's internal control. So, meaning, dapat ang auditor is naajay dako knowledge about kung unsa ang internal control sa usa ka entity. So, para makuha niya na, ma-obtain niya na nga understanding, una is, dapat makibaw ang usa ka auditor kung unsa ang design sa usa ka entity, unsa ang design sa ilang internal control. So after ana is makahibaw dapat siya kung na-implement na ba kato mismo, kung na-implement na ba. An initial understanding of the design of the internal control system is ordinarily obtained by first inquiries like asking relevant individuals about existing controls na matana. Kaduha is inspection, like reviewing documents, records to assess the control effectiveness. And lastly is observation. Mutanaw ka sa mga procedures of how the kanang controls are applied, yung sa pag-apply. Walk-through test. This task involves 1 or 2 transactions through the entire accounting system. So it is important to note that auditors are not required to obtain knowledge about sa entities internal control systems. Kay ang auditors are concerned about designs kanang policies and procedures o kaning nga design, policies and procedures are actually being applied. So, the auditor's understanding of internal control should be adequate enough to, una is identify misstatements like recognizing risk, overstatements due to weak controls on sales returns. Ikaduha is considering the risk factors. So, assessing fraud risk such as lack of segregation of duties in purchasing. Ikatulo is the designing audit procedures like planning substantive testing, verifying inventory balances, and more. So, this level of understanding enables auditors to address material misstatements, risk, and plan effective audit procedures. Documenting the auditor's understanding of internal control. So after masabtan ang internal control, ang auditor is isang i-document ang ilang findings using methods like una, narrative description. It is a written outline of key control policies and procedures. Ikaduha is flowchart. Ang flowchart is a visual representation of transaction and document flow. Ikatulo is internal control questionnaire. These are questions for management to assess control effectiveness. Assessment of control risk. The auditor should make a preliminary assessment of control risk. So if ang knowledge sa auditor is mo indicate siya nga ang internal control has a particular assertions nga not effective, then mo decide ang auditor nga there will be no need of test to be performed. Hence, mo rely sila sa substantive test. But kung ang auditor is mo indicate siya nga kanang reliable ang control, then mo determine sila whether it is efficient to obtain evidence to justify an assessment of control. So, mo justify siya ang assessment kung ang control risk is at low level. So, kung reliable ang pagtanaw sa auditor, utang niya nga low risk ang level. So, out of that. When the auditor chooses to rely on internal controls, they plan to assess control risk at less than a high level. To do so, they will have to do two ways. So, first is to identify controls. So, this pinpoints internal control policies that are likely to prevent misstatements. Ikaduha is perform test. So, to conduct a test like observing physical counts and to assess control effectiveness.
So to continue with our discussion, I'll be discussing performing tests of control. So these tests of controls are performed in order to obtain evidence about the effectiveness of the design of accounting and the internal control systems and the operation of the internal control throughout the period. So we can say na effective ang usa ka internal control nga implement sa usa ka management if they have successfully prevented material misstatements. So note that the auditor will only test the operating effectiveness of the internal control which are likely to detect material misstatement or preventing material misstatement. According to PSA, the auditor should obtain audit evidence through tests of controls to support any assessment of control risk at less than high level. So the lower the assessment of control risk, so meaning the more support that an auditor can obtain. So meaning we can say that the management's internal control is suitably designed and operating effectively. And on the other hand, if greater ang risk, so there are so much things needed to be performed. So next is the nature of test controls. Tests of controls generally consist of one of the following evidence gathering techniques, and they have four, which is inquiry, observation, inspection, and reperformance. So First is the inquiry. So this means the searching of the appropriate information about the effectiveness of the internal control. And the next is the observation. So this refers to the looking of the process being performed by the others. So example is the performance of the internal control procedures that leave no evidence of performance. So meaning, proven ba dyan ang perform sa management. And then next is inspection. This involves the examination of documents and records. So, i-check if kanang nabadjud physically present budget ang mga documents and records, if they have provided reliable evidences. And the next is re-performance. This involves repeating of the procedures being performed by the client to determine whether it properly obtained, or in other words, ilang utrohon or ilang balikon o perform ang mga procedures if to check kung these results were obtained gadyo sakto. So next is the task of control. So auditors usually perform tasks during an interim visit advance of period, but auditors cannot only rely on the results of such tasks, but also they have to consider the length of the remaining period for further evidences. And also, if there could be possibly changes which may occur in the accounting and internal control system during the remaining period.
Extent of task of control. Auditor can examine all transactions necessitating a sample size for supporting assessed control risk. In the complex landscape of auditing, scrutinizing every transaction is impractical. Auditors, therefore, judiciously select a sample to form the basis for their evaluation of control risk. Control risk is the risk that the internal controls of an organization might not prevent or detect a significant misstatements in the financial statements. This sampling approach allows auditors to draw conclusions about overall effectiveness of internal controls. Next is using results of test of control. Evaluate internal controls for design and operation. Conclusion is assess level of control risk, and use assess of control risk and inherent risk to set acceptable detection risk. And there's inverse relationship. It is high combined inherent and control risk require low detection risk. And possible modifications, which is the nature, timing, and extent of substantive tests. Once the auditors have conducted tests on the selected controls, their focus shifts to a comprehensive assessment of the internal control system. This assessment encompasses both the design and operation of internal controls. The culmination of this evaluation is reflected in the determination of the assessed control risk. This assessment, when combined with the inherent risk, the risk of material misstatements before considering internal controls, plays a pivotal role in establishing an acceptable level of detection risk. Notably, there exists an inverse relationship between the assessed control risk and detection risk. When inherent and control risks are higher, detection risk is kept lower. Additionally, based on this assessment, auditors might make adjustments to the nature, timing, and extent of substantive tests, tailoring their audit procedures to the perceived level of risk. And the next one is operating effectiveness versus implementation. The tension between confirming controls existence and testing their operation effectiveness. Audit evidence for implementation obtained through risk assessment procedures, and tests of operating effectiveness focus on how controls were applied consistency and responsible parties during the audit period. So within the auditing realm, a critical distinction arises between confirming the existence of controls and testing their operational efficacy. The process of ascertaining whether controls are in place and ready for deployment is part of the implementation phase. This involves obtaining audit evidence during risk assessment procedures. On the other hand, tests of operating effectiveness delve deeper, scrutinizing how controls were actually applied, their consistency, and the parties responsible for their execution throughout the audit period. This nouns approach ensures that auditors not only verify the presence of controls, but also assess how will they function in practice, providing a more holistic understanding of the internal control environment.
So the next topic is documenting resist level of control risk. So after evaluating the results of control and assessing the control risk, the auditor should document his assessment of control risk. So if the control risk is assessed at a high level, the auditor should document his conclusion that control risk is at high level. So if control risk is assessed at less than high level, the auditor should document his conclusion that control risk is less than a high on the basis for the assessment. So this bases actually the results of test of control. Hence, the auditor cannot assess control risk at less than high level without performing test of control. The following table summarizes the documentation requirements for auditors when considering internal control. So as you can see in the table, understanding of internal control, control risk is at a high level, so required to jump, and control risk at less than high level required side suggest. So, i-document sa auditor ang understanding sa client's internal control environment, appeal na ang control activities, risk assessments, processes, information systems, and monitoring activities. So in conclusion, control risk at high level required sa sa control risk at less than high level required sa So i-document sa auditors ang overall conclusion regarding sa effectiveness of internal control and the implications of audit strategy and procedures. So sa basis for conclusion, kung control risk at high level required sa So if control risk at less than high level, dili siya required.
Good day, everyone. So here we are, the last part of our discussion. It's all about communication of significant deficiencies in internal control. So the first bullet is all about this communication should be done in writing after or before the auditor report on the financial statement is issued. So according to this, communication ko na through writing before or after sa auditors sa pag-audit sa auditors on the report of the financial statement is issued, because it's give us clarifying issues, giving additional information, and discussing findings kay maka-allows ini sa potential adjustment o kanus awa manahuman ag-report. So the second bullet is all about the auditor does not relieve of the responsibility to communicate the significant deficiencies in writing. So by this, dili kun daw involve ang auditor sa any communication that the significant deficiencies in writing, because auditor ko na daw ang ongoing responsibility is to communicate significant deficiencies in writing, pag-ensure of clarity, pag-document o pag-reporting ng proper reporting on the financial statement. So the third one is all about the auditors are not required to search for identity internal control deficiencies. So again, auditors na po daw kay dili gid kuno siya required or dili siya involved sa pag-search sa identity sa internal control deficiency, because the primary responsibility of the auditors kay para mag-assess o pag-report on the accuracy of the financial statement. However, so during the review, tapos ug na akong daw mga circumstances na like mga issues ba na mo came out, they might note them in their report as potential areas for responsibility.
Now, let's proceed to the last bullet. Management letter. Management letter is a communication tool used by auditors to convey recommendations, observations, or suggestions to a companies. So, dire mao ni siya ang relationship between the auditors and management. Ang management letter mao ni siya ang formal document nga gi-provide sa mga auditors to companies management after ma-complete ang gihimong audit.
Sa kaninga letter kay makatabang sa management sa usa ka organization para mas ma-enhance ang mga processes ug ma-strengthen ang tibuok operations. Why is communication is important in internal control? Communication is the lifeblood of internal control system within organizations. Its importance lies in the pivotal role it plays in facilitating the smooth functioning and effectiveness of these systems. So, communications plays a central role within the internal control system. Communication is a keystone nga nagbind sa various angles sa usa ka organization in order to address in case nga naay mga problema nga giatubang ang usa ka organization. Also, ang effective communication serve as the backbone of a strong internal control framework. Maunang ang communication is very important when it comes to the organization because kung once siya dili hapsay ang dagan sa usa ka firm or company.
In the consideration of internal control, the auditor must follow steps so as to properly assess the inherent risks or problems within the organization, especially in its inventory management process. These steps include risk assessment, testing internal control, assessing control effectiveness, communication with management, documentation, and audit. By following these steps, the auditor ensures a comprehensive evaluation of internal control, contributing to the overall reliability of financial audit. For example, the auditor of ABC Electronics, a well-known manufacturer of electronic devices, was tasked with the annual financial audit. After assessing its internal control with the 1K area being its inventory management process. In assessing the internal control of ABC Electronics, there could be two possible scenarios where one is the control risk at a high level and two is the control risk is less than at a high level. The table shows the difference on how an auditor should act or perform in accordance with the scenario, whether in this case ABC Electronics it is a control risk at a high level or control risk at less than a high level. Control risk at a high level. When faced with significant flaws in internal controls at ABC Electronics, resulting in a high control risk, the auditor should promptly communicate the deficiencies to management and seek their response and plans for corrective action. The auditor must assess the potential impact on financial statements, adjust audit procedures to address the heightened risk, and consider compensating controls or alternative audit methods. Thorough documentation of identified deficiencies, management's response, and adjustments to the audit plan is crucial. The auditor may need to reassess the overall impact of the audit opinion, potentially issuing a qualified or adverse opinion if the weaknesses materially affect financial statement accuracy. Continuous monitoring of management's corrective actions is essential throughout the audit process. How about the given scenario is control risk is less than at a high level? If the auditor determines that the control risk at ABC Electronics is minimal to non-existent, it indicates a high level of confidence in the effectiveness of internal controls. In such a scenario, the auditor may streamline substantive testing procedures, relying more on the reliability of the internal controls to prevent or detect material misstatements. The auditor should still perform some substantive procedures as a form of verification but may reduce the extent of testing. Documentation remains critical, highlights the assessment of low control risk, the rationale for reliance on internal controls, and the impact on the audit approach. Overall, a low control risk enables the auditor to place greater reliance on the entity's internal control, contributing to a more efficient and focused audit process.